Hi, everyone, and welcome to this 2025 edition of WION-VOA co-production. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani, coming to you live from New York City. We are now just 10 days away from the inauguration of Donald Trump for his second term as U.S. president, and the president-elect says that he will undo a sweeping new ban on offshore oil and gas drilling after he takes office on January 20th. President Joe Biden on January 6th announced the prohibition covering most U.S. coastal waters. Veronica Balderas-Iglesias from VOA has more for us.
The benefits of offshore drilling just aren't worth the risks to the environment, health, and economy, says President Joe Biden, especially as the nation moves toward a clean energy economy. So, on January 6th, Biden announced a sweeping new ban on future offshore oil and gas drilling on some 253 million hectares of federal waters. That covers most U.S. coastal waters.
I will reverse it immediately. It'll be done immediately.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump quickly vowed to undo the ban and ramp up offshore drilling after he takes office on January 20th.
And we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to be drilling in a lot of other locations, and the energy costs are going to come way down.
But legal experts say it may not be easy to reverse the ban because it would likely require an act of Congress. Meanwhile, environmentalists say the new prohibition will help fight climate change.
Science has made clear that any expansion of fossil fuels is incompatible with keeping warming of our world below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the threshold that was set in the Paris Agreement to keep wildfires, hurricanes, other climate disasters from escalating.
Trump has previously expressed skepticism about man-made climate change. And advocates for the offshore energy industry praise the president-elect's stance.
The demand is at 100 million barrels per day for the global economy. And if we're not going to produce that energy here in the U.S., it's going to get produced somewhere. And we believe we have high standards when it comes to environmental protection.
Professor of Marine Biology at Duke University, Andy Reid, acknowledges the world needs oil for now.
We can't instantaneously transition to non-carbon-based sources of energy. So it will take a long time. And even if the pendulum is swinging backwards a little bit now, I think the long-term perspective is going to be towards cleaner sources of energy.
And he adds the transition to greener energy will happen with or without U.S. leadership. Veronica Balderas-Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Joining us now with additional reporting is VOA's Jessica Stone. She's live from the White House. Hi, Jessica. Great to see you. Donald Trump is also expected to reverse Biden administration steps to promote electric vehicles. And Happy New Year to you. So much of the climate activism in the United States is now moving to the state and local level. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, and this is really a reaction, right, about to the Trump administration and even what we saw under the last Trump administration and the rollbacks that occurred, for example, the Paris Climate Accord there. But states are taking the lead now. They are already implementing emissions targets of their own. We saw California 2 years ago implement an emissions reduction standard for the state that requires automakers to produce zero emission vehicles by 2035. Another 24 states have also initiated their own emission reduction targets. And, you know, the other thing to point out here is that many of these states have a vested interest in electric vehicles because the electric battery factories that have been incentivized under the CHIPS Act and the IRA that the Biden administration passed are putting those battery factories in Republican-led states. So we now have a conflict with those Republican-led states literally having to choose between the economic viability of those jobs that come with those electric vehicle factories and the potential for less demand for those electric vehicles should those emissions targets or some of those incentives be taken away by the Trump administration. Susan?
And Jessica, California policies are a key thrown in the side of President-elect Donald Trump's environmental policy. With wildfires burning now in Los Angeles County, we're seeing renewed fighting between a state governor and a potential future Democratic presidential candidate and Trump himself.
Yeah, it's getting pretty dicey. And you know, Trump and Newsom have certainly traded their fair number of barbs over the last couple of years. But we should note, first of all, that the latest on the wildfires is that they have claimed at least 10 people's lives now. They have harmed and destroyed more than 14,000 acres of urban California and neighborhoods and schools, hospitals, and the like. 9,000 structures at least have been destroyed. The Angeles National Forest now closed, nearly 180,000 or more evacuation orders throughout that region. This is a really devastating wildfire, an unprecedented level of wind pushing those brush fires around highly populated areas. And against this backdrop, Trump is blaming Newsom for some of his water usage policies. Governor Gavin Newsom is the governor of the state of California. He is expected to be and already is a rising star in the Democratic Party, and was favored to be considered if Kamala Harris hadn't taken the ticket and run for the presidency on the Democratic ticket. Trump is blaming him for how he has been diverting fresh water supplies to preserve and protect fish and wildlife from the water sources away from urban areas. That has actually been mitigated somewhat in the last couple of years. Some of that diverted water now changed to bring more water back to urban areas, but that hasn't stopped President-elect Trump from talking about his desire to put more pressure on California to put even more water in the urban areas, because they ran out of water in specific neighborhoods to fight the fire, specifically the Palisades. Their fire hydrants ran dry. And so this is a political argument taking advantage of the conditions on the ground in Los Angeles County. And I would fully expect to see it continue into the presidency. Susan?
Jessica, stay with us, please. I want to bring you back in after this next story by your colleague about a new approach to cutting the size of Washington's bureaucracy. All right, President-elect Donald Trump wants to slash government spending. A proposed advisory commission called the Department of Government Efficiency will lead the effort. It's not a new concept, as VOA's Dora Mikwar reports. American leaders have tried to reduce the role of government almost since the beginning.
Billionaire businessman Elon Musk wants to slash $2 trillion in federal spending. He'll be co-head of the Department of Government Efficiency, a proposed Donald Trump Presidential Advisory Commission. It's not the first time a U.S. administration has pledged to cut government expenses.
Presidents have been talking in one way or another about downsizing or reducing the role of government since the founding of the Republic.
It started with America's third president, Thomas Jefferson, in the early 1800s. Jefferson eliminated some military and government jobs, temporarily lowering costs.
I am convinced that at least 4 million have been given employment.
In the 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt expanded the federal workforce to cope with the Great Depression. Roosevelt's New Deal employed millions, providing relief for the poor while stimulating the economy. The jobs ended once the crisis was over.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan formed the Grace Commission, asking the group of about 150 business leaders to find ways to eliminate inefficiency.
President Reagan asked the Grace Commission to look at the government with an eye towards making it work more like a business.
But the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library website says that most of the recommendations, especially those requiring legislation from Congress, were never implemented. Still, some historians say Reagan succeeded in shifting the national conversation in favor of a smaller role for the federal government in solving public problems.
It was a fundamental sea change from the previous century, really, of expansion of the role of government in society.
In the 1990s, Bill Clinton worked to cut about 300,000 federal jobs, mostly through retirements and the outsourcing of services.
Certainly one of the more significant administrations in terms of reducing the role of government of the modern era.
During his first term, Donald Trump ordered a federal hiring freeze and other cuts. Now he wants his Department of Government Efficiency to finish the job. Some question the wisdom of taking a business approach to running the government.
When you're the government, you are responsible to the people. And your goal is not to make money. Your goal is to provide services and defend the nation. There's a lot of fraud and waste in the private sector. So I'm not that sure that business people are necessarily the best people to even find out, to even discover fraud and waste.
Trump and Musk are using one tool to get their point across that wasn't available during past efforts to cut government.
There can be a faster and more comprehensive response because of social media. Members of Congress tend to respond more to social media than the old-fashioned letters they used to get.
In many cases, Congress has to agree before any cuts can be made. Dora McQuarrie, VOA News, Washington.
All right, we still have VOA's Jessica Stone with us live from the White House. Jessica, next week, Congress begins confirmation hearings for Trump's picks to lead various government agencies. What can you tell us about that, and who is under the most pressure to cut costs from this new DOGE push?
Yeah, next week is really packed with confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we've got Veterans Affairs, the Pentagon Chief, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Interior, the Attorney General, Secretary of State's Energy and Transportation. Really a lot of leadership is going to be under scrutiny. Leadership choices is going to be under scrutiny next week on the Hill. And, you know, some of these in particular are already on the record for calling for cuts, in particular the defense pick, Pete Hegseth and Attorney General Pam Bondi. They have already called for deep cuts in some parts of the Pentagon in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring practices and some of the administrative functions that go along with that. That is something that Pete Hegseth has actually taken a very large stand on, and Pam Bondi and the party really looking for some structural changes in the Department of Justice. They are arguing that the Department of Justice has been weaponized against particular conservative ideals. Of course, that's not an opinion shared by everyone in Washington, but that is the argument they will make in order to advance further cuts. One person that's not going to be on Capitol Hill next week, though, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's Trump's selection for heading the Department of Health and Human Services. That department oversees Medicaid, Medicare, all of these social safety net healthcare programs that are also really vulnerable to cuts in terms of the substantial portion of the budget that they contribute to. He is facing a lot of scrutiny, of course, because he's a vaccine skeptic and an environmental lawyer. In fact, this week, 15,000 physicians signed a document calling for him not to be selected as the head of that department, saying, quote, he is dangerous. He, though, will be under pressure if he's selected to make cuts as well. Susan?
And finally, Jessica, a majority of Washington's budget comes from defense spending and social programs like healthcare and retirement benefits. But there's another key player in any effort to reduce the size of government, the director of the budget office. What do we know about Donald Trump's pick to lead that department?
Well, we've seen this movie before in Trump Point 1. Russ Vought is the name of the gentleman that he has selected to be his director of the Office of Management and Budget, also known as OMB. He did serve in the previous Trump administration, and he is well known for being someone who supports deep cuts in government spending, deep accountability structures, he would argue, in shaping the bureaucracy in Washington, and a deregulation advocate. He says that the budget department is, quote, the president's most important tool in dealing with the bureaucracy, and he has been on the record saying that President Trump already knows how to use OMB. OMB not only sets the policy agenda for the White House, it also helps to find money to pay for it. And so he's really in a position to carry out a lot of the cuts that have been proposed under Project 2025, that list of talking points and of agenda items for an incoming Trump administration, which Trump himself distanced himself from on the campaign trail, has ended up hiring and nominating a number of people from. Russ Vought actually wrote a significant portion of Project 2025, arguing for the kinds of cuts he may now be asked to carry out. And he is even advocating using the threat of default on the nation's debt to extract large spending cuts. And he also holds the belief that the president doesn't have to spend all of the money Congress approves. That is not a popular point of view here in Washington, but he will have a nomination hearing next week. We're expecting that one to get a lot of attention. He is going to be grilled significantly on his spending priorities and how he sees executing the president's desired cuts and even DOJ's cuts coming into this new administration. Susan.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a busy week. Jessica, thank you so much for all of that and have a great weekend.
You too.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.